Okay, Shankar, you've gone live on streaming also?
Yeah, just now, sir. Started, sir. Streaming started, sir.
Yeah, okay. Do it on Facebook and YouTube too.
Yes, sir.
The moment he comes, we'll start the program, no issue. Is it? Professor is just opening the Zoom and is coming in soon. Let's.
The professor is already there, sir.
Is there what is video? Tell him to switch on the video.
Professor, sir.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Mr. Arun Kumar.
Good evening.
Oh,
Yes.
welcome, and you can switch on your video, please.
Oh, it's not on?
Switched on. It's on. Switched on.
It's on.
You bring him onto the screen, Shankar.
You can view. Let me view.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Right.
Good evening, sir. Now it's quite clear.
Great.
Yes. Your PowerPoint has come. So we'll start. Now the time is 5:53. We'll start about 5:55, sir.
Okay.
I'll brief about MMA event so that about 5 minutes is
Sure.
that.
Absolutely.
So we won't eat into your time so that meanwhile people keep joining actually. Sir.
Sure. We'll do that. Yeah. Thanks.
Shankar, professors all loaded, no?
All set, sir. All are muted.
Okay. Arvind, I'm joining the live program now. Anything, Arjun? I'll call you. Okay, bye. So, Professor, how is the weather in Delhi now? It's picked up.
Now getting hot today. Till yesterday it was quite cloudy, so it was quite pleasant. How about Chennai?
Chennai is yes, hot. We're all praying for the weather to be hot, thinking that it may control coronavirus.
Yes.
Every time we pray for rain, now we pray for no. We want hot, humid conditions. Yes. Look at the way the world is changing, actually. Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
But anyway, we are all very optimistic. People are all looking forward to. Everybody talking optimistic, but things, hoping everything will be in their favor.
Well, eventually they should be. In the short run, they may be bad. Like for instance, the oil prices collapsed yesterday to
yes, terrible.
minus 30, the oil futures.
Yes.
That shows the extent of the crisis. It's hitting every sector and every country. China had a minus 7% rate of growth in the first quarter. So, and they are lucky it's minus 7. I think the world
China is going to be in trouble, sir, because the whole world is so much against. Psychologically, emotionally, I think it will carry on for some time. They'll be at the receiving end. It's a very unfortunate. That's the reality of life, I suppose. You will know better.
I think the world economy may be facing some like minus 10, minus 15% growth this year, given the extent of the damage that has been already caused. So let us hope that, after about a year or so, things start recovering. That's the hope. Yeah. So let's look at the long term and hope for the best. Short run, we have to bear the pain.
I know, sir. I think as somebody mentioned to me, it wasn't a World War II or some of the worst epidemics happened in the world, actually. Because in spite of the technology and the infrastructure, I think we're all struggling to.
No, but it is because of technology, air travel. I remember Gandhiji saying in his Hind Swaraj that because of railways, the disease spreads very fast, because he got caught by Spanish flu in 1919.
Yes.
Okay, so he, condemned railways. Now it's air travel. Within 6 hours, you can be in another continent. So, from Wuhan, it could spread within days to all parts of the world. What earlier would have taken months, now it can happen within
Maybe it's a price
hours.
we are paying for the
Yes,
globalization, I suppose,
yes,
actually.
yes, yes.
Yes, yes, sir.
Right.
Anyway, Sundar, all set. Shankar?
Sir, all set, sir. You
Yes.
can start now. It's possible.
Yeah, let's start it. Okay, going now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to each one of you for another edition of our evening talk, which we want to bring it to you during the difficult times. We have been planning a number of programs for your benefit from morning till evening. We start with the morning yoga. Thereafter, we have a quiz program, and the quiz has become so popular today. We have anticipated about 500 people to participate. Within half an hour of opening, 500 is got filled. So now, what we are going to do? We have to make it how we can take it to 1,000 people. It's good. Mind tickling. People are really looking forward to the quiz in the morning, and I'm so happy that your encouragement, what makes us to think innovatively to accommodate as many people as possible. Then every morning, 11 o'clock, we got some outstanding lectures, both 11 and 6 in the evening. If you are by any chance you have missed your inbox, let me briefly tell you what's going to happen. Tomorrow evening, 22nd, we got a post-COVID idea 3+5 guidelines for the building companies and institutions, and we have one of the outstanding speaker. R. Gopalakrishnan, former executive director of Tata Sons, is going to be talking to us on this. And I go miles to listen to him. And he's a thought leader. His ideas and inputs will be great encouragement for us, and also give what the reality in life. Then on the 23rd of morning, 11 a.m., we got again an outstanding program. Someone success mantra for Instagram. Ms. Dania, she's going to be talking to us. She's from US. She's an authority on Instagram marketing, and she has done some phenomenal work in the field of digital as well as fashion designing in USA. And she got large number of followers, more than 80, 90,000 followers on Instagram. She's going to tell us how you can take Instagram during these difficult times to take it to the next level, your business, and not only your businesses, your educational institutions, your personal branding, many things. I urge it upon you. We kept it in the morning, 11 o'clock, so that many of them who are also engaged in office those times, they don't miss it actually. And also, I urge upon you, please mark your diary. It's happening at 11 a.m. on the 23rd of April. Then on 23rd of April, again, we have a busy day that day. We have a 6 p.m. COVID lessons learned from for the future. Again, we have got a former bureaucrat, former revenue secretary, Mr. Sivaraman, is going to be talking to us on the COVID lessons in senior IAS officer. So he has got his perspective. So he will have a better understanding of the government views on this. And let's listen to him on 23rd of April. Thereafter, on the 24th of April, we are dealing with unknown, well-known, and what is the COVID impact. Mridula Ramesh, she's the director of Sundaram Textiles. She's going to be talking to us. She's also an environmental specialist. She'll be able to bring in the mix of both what's going to be thing, and our thought and output is going to be something different than what normally people think. So she's going to talk how it's impacting, how people are changing over the business, how big companies are making ventilators, something those lines. So the whole look at the business itself will change, and she's going to be sharing with us. Then on 25th April, we have Be a Diamond in the Sky, because we also wanted this time where you can really enhance your branding capacity as a whole, as individual, as an entrepreneur, as an organization. And Vijay Pasati, one of the best mind in the brands in the country, he's going to be talking to us from Bangalore on 6 p.m. on 25th of April. Again, on 27th of April, we also want to think that a lot of things are happening online. How much cyber security is going to be an fact and issues involved in this. So we are going to talk about the data on the move, cybersecurity implications and opportunities. We got two outstanding speakers from Bangalore, Navi, and one more is going to be talking to us. And this is happening at 11 o'clock in the morning, because we provision the program based on the needs of our members and needs of the industry and corporate organizations. And 28th, we have been doing everything. We want to do something out of the box. 28th, we have GD Sharma, who's a great singer, and he's going to be talking Shami Ghazal, music and management. So we have a variety of songs will be sung online during Zoom. We'll also invite we are going to send a note where we'll be inviting some of our members who are a great singer, not a bathroom singer, some singers who can really entertain the people to join us on live, so that we'll make the evening so beautiful for the people to forget whatever the worries you're having. So how you can blend the management with the music is going to be the theme of that evening. And so look forward to you joining on the 27th evening. Then we have also on the 30th, we have a Swamiji from Rajkot, Maharaj of head of Ramakrishna Mission. Is going to be manage stress and mind management, and his authority is a great speaker. He comes regularly and speaks all over the world. So it's a privilege. He is accepted to speak to members of MMA. And on 30th, again, we have a very nice talk with Bharat Bala. You all know Bharat Bala, who is the one who produced the movie on Vande Matram, and along with Aishwarya is a world film champion, Manivandan. She's a world film champion. And Bharat Bala recently produced a movie on Silamam 3000 years. So they're going to be there. So these are some of the programs we also lining up. Besides that, we have all the events as scheduled already. Quiz every afternoon. We are getting a lovely article. Then we also have a business crossword puzzle. We are bringing it to you every day. And evening talks are there. A number of workshops are done. We also done a new initiative. We are taking exclusive program for management students. So we are reaching them institution-wise. So tailor-made to their requirements. On 29th, again, the international speaker from USA will be talking to, I think we expect more than 8 to 10,000 students to participate, the career guidelines, and he's going to be talking from Chicago. These are some of the programs, what is going to be happening in the next few days. Idea is to keep you engaged all the time, listening to news. You get so sad about it, what's happening. Now, today's subject, which is very, very interesting, current economic crisis and the way forward. There could be none better than Professor Arun Kumar to speak on this. He's authority on the subject. We keep hearing so many things. I keep hearing from the news. I keep hearing from the thing. And some what really impacted me, what really made me choose this topic is some of the thing like they say India seems to be recovering from the super suppressing the curve, and it has to continue. So we have to be very, very cautious because suppressing the curve is a good message sending to the world of businesses. And they also say there may be a there may be reoccurrence sometime, they say. So one should be proactive to the institutions. Some of the people keep telling, so it has happened in some countries. It's better to be proactive and how we can handle the situation in case it happens to you as a proactive. And one more important observation which came from many is capital will flow less to the battered countries. The Western worlds have been impacted quite a lot. So the many people like to invest capital in the country which have got less affected. People say that way. Professor will be more able to elaborate more on this. That way, India will attract more capital. India, Indonesia, some of the countries which are not that much affected as other countries, and people say the spending habits will totally change. People will go for frugal living, and now the priority for each individual will be healthcare. The way the whole world looks at some of the activities will be different, and people are opt for cheaper goods. People opt for big brand may come down. People may not opt for big brand. They'll go for goods which serve the purpose, and loyalty to the brands will diminish over the period, and that is some of the important. The total trust there be deficit in dealing with the people. So people will be looking at various things in with the trust deficit. The large offices may vanish. People like to work from home. The whole way the working conditions will change. People may do offices in a smaller office, which will serve the purposes. And there's some of the things which came. They want to be frugal. They want a lot of government stimulus will fit in, which you can improve. Now, government, most of the countries started looking inward. US has stopped the visa conditions, and many other people have stopped investing things. So when the countries start looking inward, the import, both will get impacted. So there are so many issues which are being wholesale versus retail, high-end versus, there are a lot of gift coupons are being offered by the high-end companies. One of the McKinsey survey also indicated 53% of the Indian entrepreneurs are very optimistic. They'll bounce back and they want to do MSME. I'm quite sure Professor Arun Kumar will throw more light on this. And while 53% as against only about 25% of the Japanese are optimistic to do a great business. Now, this is what is the background to the thing which we wanted to set this talk this evening by the professor. He's one of the outstanding person, and it's really, we are all really blessed to have him speaking to us this evening. Let me have the privilege of introducing Professor Arun Kumar. Professor Arun Kumar is a Malcom Adiseshiah Chair Professor Institute of Social Science in New Delhi, and he joined JNU in the year 1984. Retired in 2015 after an excellent career, and he was the head of Center for Economic Studies, and he's also done his PhD in economics and from JNU, and is a Master of Physics and Princeton University, USA. So he got a mind of maths and physics. That's very, very important. Physics and economics, I think, there's a deadly combination. That's why people think it very, very logically. He's a gold medalist, Delhi School, IS Secondary School, not only at school level, consistent performer. He's also a gold medalist in the university during his graduation. He's specialist in Department of Developmental Economics, Public Finance, Public Policy, and also macroeconomic situations, macroeconomic policies. He's a part of the study team of a black economy, Central Board of Direct Taxes in the year 1982-85. And he's also authored a book on black economy, which is one which we had the privilege of Arun Kumar also visiting MA to speak on this subject of black economy. He's a regular speaker in number of forums, a number of worldwide organizations, worldwide audience for him. And he's written a number of books. He also written on alternative budget. He's written extensively regular articles. I see him regularly writing in Hindu, number of newspapers. And he also writes on various issues besides not only in economy. He's traveled widely all over the world and lectured. And there could be nobody better than him to speak to us on the economy and what is the way forward. And thank you, Professor, for accepting the invitation to be with us this evening. Over to you. And may I also request all the audience to who are joined us in the chat mode, please send a warm welcome to our professor with a hi so that he can start his thing. Please wait till we announce if you have any questions, don't have to wait till the question session. Send your question to the chat box so that we'll be able to respond to you then and there. And lovely evening. We are looking for a fascinating evening. Over to you, Professor.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Group Captain Vijay Kumar. Thanks to MMA for inviting me to give this talk. I'm really delighted to do this. I've been anticipating that, things are going to go bad since January. And I've been writing a lot on it. I've written in the Hindu and the EPW and various other channels. Today, what I'm going to do is focus on the macroeconomic aspects of it. I'm not going to go into the details of the micro aspects of the sectors, but I'll look at the macro aspects, and that's what I'm going to present, and then try and say what needs to be done at present, to save the economy, because, things are very bad. So first slide, please. As an introduction, the first slide, please. Yeah. So, an architect friend of mine, he called me up on the day that the lockdown was announced, and he said, during partial lockdown, everything was closed, factories, offices, etc., all around. So he said, how's the economy running? And that's a question I thought very many people would have. How's the economy running when, everything is closed in a lockdown? You see all around empty roads, closed markets, consumption of diesel and electricity has fallen by 30%. Today you had the thing that, global futures prices have dropped to minus, to negative, which has never happened before. So, it suggests that economic activity has come to a halt. And this is not only true of India, but a large number of countries in the world. So complete lockdown is not only in India, but also in many, many countries. And that's why, but for the production of essential items, if the economy is at standstill, what does it imply for society? That's the question I'm raising. That, what is it that is there for us? What are we looking forward at? Next slide, please. Now, to understand that, we need to understand the kind of division of labor that is there in our societies today. Earlier we used to talk about self-sufficiency of village life, but that is completely gone. Now, we don't even produce a spoon or, a small item at home. We buy everything from outside. We buy everything in the market, And what is a market? Market is a place where we exchange. We produce, say, some service or some good, and we exchange it for something else that we need. So money is only a medium of exchange. And what we do is when we work, we earn an income. And that work has to be done outside. If suppose my spouse works at home, I don't pay, and that doesn't get counted in the GDP. But if I employ a maid, then that work is counted as, GDP. So in a sense, with division of labor, a large number of people are working at very small things and exchanging with each other's labor. They're earning income out of that. Once we understand that, we can understand what's going on. So next slide, please. We are not Robinson Crusoe. A Robinson Crusoe marooned alone on an island has to produce everything, whether it's his clothing, his, food, his energy, everything has to be produced by him. And so he has a very rudimentary life. But today, because of the kind of division of labor we have, we have all kinds of things that are produced and we all consume that. Now, in a society, we have so much capital, different kinds of capital, that we can potentially produce large number of things. So what happens in a lockdown? People can't go to their place of work, so production just comes to a halt. And when different kinds of production comes to a halt, we don't have the things available to us, So modern day production is concentrated in some pockets, where the factories are, where some regions are, like for instance, SEZs are there, or industrial parks are there, or in agriculture, we may have concentration of production in certain pockets like Haryana and Punjab and Western UP, etc. And then this is distributed all around the economy. So you require finance, you require trade, and you require transportation to be able to distribute all these things so that people can consume. And that is what is called global supply chain. So even nations today are not self-sufficient. And what has happened in the last 25 years is that China has become a global hub, of supply for most manufactured items, whether it be toys, whether it be electronic items, and so on. So we are becoming largely interdependent, So if production stops in one country or in one region, then it begins to stop in other regions and so on also. And that's why since January, when the Chinese production started getting impacted, what happened was that, the global production also started getting impacted, and we in India also started getting impacted. Next slide, please. Now, to produce, we need inventories, we need stock of inputs, and we also hold a stock of output. And that's where when we have inventories, there's a financial cost, since you require working capital, which is borrowed from the banks. And when you borrow from the banks, then you have to pay interest to the bank, and that is your cost for the holding the inventory. So when supply disruptions take place due to lockdown, immediately the production shuts down. And when lockdown happens, two things happen. Workers cannot go to work, the machines, and supplies of inputs are disrupted. So production largely stops. So even though workers and capital both exist, production stops. And when that happens, your inventories build up and the cost of that increases. Next slide, please. So the production that is carried out at large scale and small scale. But in India, we also have the medium scale and the cottage sector, or the unorganized sector. And there are different kinds of working capital that are held. Large scale and medium scale have a lot of capital, but the small and the cottage sector, by definition, have small amount of working capital. And you use the working capital to buy raw materials, inputs, and pay the workers their salaries, any overheads, etc. That's all coming out of that. So at the start of the business, we also take loans to set up factory or to set up machines, etc. And that also is taken as loan. So in brief, a lot of debt is taken up by the businesses on which they have to pay interest. And as soon as the production stops, then this interest payment becomes a bit of a problem, a bit of a challenge. Next slide, please. So how does the business pay interest on whatever it has borrowed? It sells its product and the revenue is generated from sales, and using that, we pay interest. So if sales stop, then repayment of loan or payment of interest becomes difficult and businesses begin to fail. So if production continues when sales have stopped, more working capital is required, because then you have to hold inventory. The inventory increases and working capital increases, and therefore more interest has to be paid. The cost increases. So if the lockdown takes place, production is continuing, but the sales have stopped, then losses mount and companies start then cutting back production. So that's what happens in an economy. In a lockdown, that production stops and production is curtailed. Next slide, please. Now, when you have healthy companies have a lot of reserves, okay? And when they begin to use the reserves to continue production, then they are dis-saving. Weak companies or smaller units which do not have much reserve, they also dis-save, because whatever working capital they have, that is getting used up. Cottage sector has its own savings, and in a lockdown, the savings are used up for consumption, because they basically have very little distinction between their income from work and what they use for their consumption. So in other words, what is happening is that businesses, during a lockdown, when production stops, inventories are held, they are then dis-saving in the economy. Now, where do the banks get their funds from? They get it from their depositors. The depositors put their savings in the banks, and the banks are then loaning that out to the businesses. So when the banks do not get interest payment or the loans are not returned, then the banks are also dissaving. In other words, when the production stops, this savings increase enormously and the saving in the economy goes down dramatically. Next slide, please. Now, working capital is a part of our investment in the economy, So if the working capital gets blocked, then investments get blocked. And when investments get blocked, then what happens is that growth stops. It is investment which is more important for growth than consumption. Consumption, of course, matters, but investment matters much more. There is in economics what is called the multiplier. So the GDP increases by a multiple of the investment. Now, when investments stop or decline, then the rate of growth of the economy also declines. So what is happening is that production is what results in the workers earning wages and the businessmen earning profit. But if there's a lockdown and production stops, then the wages stop and the profits also stop. Now, you can continue to pay some wages if you are in the organized sector, you have your reserves, but that means you are dissaving, and that cannot last for very long. So as a result, when the incomes go down, whether it's the workers or it's the businesses, then the demand falls in the economy. When demand falls in the economy and production is cut back, then the production capacity becomes idle, and then more investment does not make sense. Because if I can produce 100 cars, but I'm only selling 50 cars, then why invest more in another 20 cars? Because then my working capital cost will go up and my capitalization will go up and my losses will go up. So as soon as the plants and so on become idle, the investment also begins to collapse. And therefore there's a second round of decline in incomes and consumption as investment declines and demand declines. So in a vicious cycle, you have the decline of stoppage of production, decline in savings, decline in investments, decline in consumption. So the macroeconomic effect of a lockdown is that macro economy begins to run itself down. Next slide, please. Now, as I was saying, savings, what are savings? Savings are the balance of what is left after consumption from the income. So savings, when incomes begin to collapse, so do savings. As I was saying, there's a dissaving, but also what is happening is that the middle class and the organized sector, what they are consuming is basically out of their past saving. So the past deposits are withdrawn and they are also dissaving. So in other words, the deposits in the banks begin to decline, and simultaneously, because investment has fallen and demand has fallen and production has fallen, credit demand also begins to fall. So the banks also find that they have a lot of liquidity. For instance, the RBI recently pointed out that there is about 6 lakh crores that the banks have deposited with the RBI. So there's lack of demand, and that's why the whole credit cycle also begins to decline. Next slide, please. And that is what helps us understand. Next slide, please. Yeah. So even when the central bank takes action to try and boost the economy, like helping to cut the interest rate or provide extra liquidity, that does not give a boost to the economy. And the reason is very simple. When businesses are shut down and investment is no more profitable, or investment will actually lead to greater losses, then the businesses will not take credit to invest further or to produce more. So banks are now parking excess funds with the RBI, and the RBI is therefore cutting down the reverse repo in a hope that banks will begin to lend. But if the demand for credit is not there, then the banks will not succeed in doing that, and whatever extra funds they have, they'll park it with the the RBI to earn at least some interest. And interest rates will also fall as a result of all these activities. So providing more liquidity in the market in a situation where there's a shutdown of the economy, that will not lead to a boost to the economy. And that's why we find that the central banks all over the world, whether it be the Fed in the US or RBI, they are trying to pump in liquidity into the economy. But the economy is continuing to go down, because at this stage, when the demand is not there and when the supply is not there, then it's a very different situation. This kind of monetary policy might work in a business cycle where the demand is down, but here not only the demand is down, but the supply is also down, and therefore it's a unique kind of a situation which has not been faced by the world for a very long time. I remember people used to in India talk about the epidemic in the 1930s, where there was plague and there was cholera and so on, and large number of people died in those years. I remember my mother talking about how half her family died in that period, and they became very poor. So in a pandemic, both supply and demand collapse, and that is what we are facing. This is a situation worse than in a war. In a war, the demand doesn't decline. The war effort leads to more employment and more production for the war effort, etc. But that is not the case at the moment. So in other words, the usual monetary fiscal policies do not operate in a situation where the economy has been shut down. That is the difference between what we are facing today and what we had faced in 2008-9, or what we had faced in earlier periods when the economy went into a recession or even a depression in the 1920s and 30s. So that's where the monetary fiscal policies have to be very different. Next slide, please. Now, let's look at the effect on the unorganized sector. In India, we have 94% employment in the unorganized sector, and it produces 45% the output. And they largely have low incomes and very little saving. And these are largely the poor people in the Indian economy. So when their income stop, their consumption drastically falls because they have no savings. The middle class and the upper middle class have their bank balances and savings out of which they can continue to buy. But the poor, they don't have that, And that's why as soon as the lockdown was announced, closures took place, people didn't have incomes, and they started migrating back to the villages, so that they could be with their people. And what you heard, the refrain was that if we have to die, it's better to die with your own people rather than far away from them. So there was both an economic aspect and an emotional aspect to why the migration was taking place. And even now, people want to migrate back to the villages because the fear has gone into them. And that is something that we have to worry about, because even when the relaxation is there of the lockdown, you may find large number of people, rather than wanting to work, may want to go back to the villages, to their people. So why is this situation taking place? Because our development has been very uneven, and therefore there are backward areas and forward areas. In the backward areas, incomes are low, work is very little, so people migrate from these backward areas to the forward areas, to the more advanced areas. And that's what you see, these people who have come singly or with small bit of family with them, they all want to go back, and they're willing to walk 1,000 kilometers. That's the kind of emotional thing that we have seen, with the load of their belongings on their head and very little food. People have been willing to walk 1,000 kilometers. It's a heart-rending situation. Now, the cottage sector, which is the small micro sector that we are talking about, there the producers exhaust their savings in a very short while. So apart from the workers, even the producers in the cottage sector, they have very little savings, and which they use as working capital, and they exhaust that also. And that's why the cottage sector may find it very difficult to restart work, because they would not have the working capital. Next slide, please. Apart from the unorganized sector, we have the organized sector. The organized sector employees, which have fixed incomes, they will continue to get at least some part of their salaries, and they can try and use that to continue their consumption of essentials. But the companies who are paying them their salaries but not producing, they're dissaving, they're using up their reserves, and that can work only for a few months, but that cannot be sustained for very long. So the companies will be dissaving, the workers will be also dissaving. Then you have the self-employed and the elderly, the retired people. They are also eating into their savings because their work has also come to a halt, or the elderly and the retired who depend on bank interest or other deposits interest. They have also suffered a loss because the bank interest and others have come down. So they are also eating into their savings. Small savers who had invested in the stock market, they've suffered big losses as a result of that. And I dare say that even the real estate markets will decline. So all asset prices are likely to decline. And that will mean that a lot of the value of assets will evaporate. This leads to what is called the wealth effect. The wealth effect is that when your asset value is high, then you feel well enough and you start spending money and consume more. When the wealth effect takes hold, then you cut back on your expenditures, and that's when the demand also declines. So that is something that we have to worry about as far as the organized and the well-off sections are concerned. Next slide, please. Now, businesses which were already stressed, we know that the economy was already slowing down. By the last quarter of last year, the rate of growth had fallen below 5% rate of growth, and many businesses were stressed. There were a lot of NPAs, etc. Those are the businesses which will be even further stressed, and they will now face failure. Similarly, firms which are highly leveraged, which have a very high ratio of debt to capital, they are also likely to fail again. And large number of financial sector firms, which are also highly leveraged, can also be in this category. We had already seen earlier that the NBFCs like ILFS had failed. We had seen earlier that in the banking sector also failures were increasing, whether the PMC Bank or recently the Yes Bank, and people had been withdrawing funds from other small banks. So those are the banks, etc., which are again going to be stressed. So we have to see that this kind of failure doesn't happen, and how can we do that? That becomes the next problem as far as the RBI and the government are concerned. So in the financial sector, what happens is that there's an interlinkage amongst the various firms. When one fails, it doesn't return the loan to the other, and then the next one also starts failing. So this interlinkage must be recognized. That's what happened at the time of Lehma Brothers. When one firm failed, it led to failure or the potential failure of other firms as well. So we need to look at that. Now, the 3-month moratorium of payment of interest to banks, that will help firms. But what will it do to the banks when the banks, do not get the interest payment even later on? Then there'll be a problem there. So all in all, the revival seems very uncertain at this point of time because businesses are getting stressed. Businesses can have failure, but it's only the businesses with large reserves which will feel less of pain, but they'll also feel the pain. But it's the other businesses which will begin to fail and which will lead to a cascading effect of failures. So this is something that we have to watch out for. Next slide, please. Now, let us look at agriculture, because that's the largest sector and that's the most essential. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So the primary sector consisting of agriculture, mining, forestry, and logging and fishing, that can continue production in a very dispersed manner. Agriculture is done in open areas, not as closed, enclosed spaces, but agriculture is facing a problem of shortage of workers at this point of time. The Rabi crop is a bumper crop, and it was expected that that will help, the farmers, that will help, stabilize the price of agricultural commodities. But what has happened is that, agriculture is facing trouble. Perishables like vegetables and fruits, they are, getting spoiled in the fields because they're not being harvested. There's no trade and transport to take them to the mandis and from there to the urban centers. Mining has more or less stopped. Forestry and logging and fishing can continue, but I think they have also gone down quite substantially at this point of time. So the effect of the lockdown is that as incomes fall, the demand for the produce of agriculture also declines. That's what we saw during demonetization. And that's why during demonetization also agricultural prices collapsed. So not only is the crop getting spoiled in the fields, but also the prices that the farmer will get for its crop will be very low. They'll fall. And on the other hand, what will happen is that in the urban areas, the prices will rise because there's a shortage, because trade and transport is not functioning, so produce is not able to come out. So what you have is the twin effect that the shortages in the urban areas and excess in the rural areas, prices declining in the rural areas and prices rising in the urban areas, and creating further problem for the unorganized sector workers who anyway have very low income. So the only solution for this is that we need to have expanded procurement and expanded supply through PDS in urban areas. The government must try and procure almost everything that is produced in the rural areas in agriculture and supply that in urban areas, because that is what the basic essential item that everybody requires, the food. So I think the problem can be resolved only if we can procure at a large scale in the rural areas and bring that into urban areas and give it free. That will also help, keep the lockdown. If people have to keep coming out to buy their supplies, then lockdown does not have much meaning. And for this, what I've been suggesting is that there are a large number of public transport buses which are lying idle. There are a large number of buses at airports. There are a large number of police and army trucks that are available. Those should be used to procure extensively from the rural areas and bring them up to the urban areas. It's no doubt a very Herculean task. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's not a simple task, but this is the time where we have to carry out the very difficult things. Otherwise, we'll have problem both in rural areas and in urban areas where there may be shortage of supplies. So this is something very essential that we need to look at. Next slide, please. Now, the question is how quickly can there be recovery? Some people say that we'll bounce back very quickly, that there'll be a V-shaped recovery. Other people say that there'll be a U-shaped recovery over a long extended period of time. But whatever it may be, the point is that lockdown can only be relaxed in stages. It requires massive testing. That's what you hear Governor Cuomo say in New York. That's what you're hearing what the British, spokespersons are saying every day in the press conference. Because without testing, you don't know where the attack will come, and there's a fear of a second round attack. Everybody is worried about the second round attack that could come, and that's why some people in India say that the peaking of the attack would take place sometime in June or July or even in August, because as we relax, as more people go around, we don't know, because they're asymptomatic people, they may be carriers and they may infect other people, and especially the elderly people. We know that more than 70% of the people who are dying are those who are above the age of 60. So you can have a lot of deaths. So therefore, any relaxation has to be very cautious. It has to be done very slowly, because we need much more testing. Now, if that is the case, then production can only recover gradually. And therefore, we will not have a bounce back, a V-shaped bounce back. In fact, we'll have a U-shaped recovery. We can also think about China, for instance. China has recovered and started producing, but we know that in the first quarter, it has lost. It's now -7% rate of growth. And because exports are not going to bounce back, because there's a lockdown in large number of its trading partners, demand for exports from China would be very low, and therefore Chinese economy, which is heavily dependent on exports, that is not going to bounce back very quickly at all. Think about it this way: China, when it went through the lockdown, it was the only country, and all other countries were still not in lockdown and trading. But now, a large number of countries, the big countries, US, EU, India, etc., they're all in lockdown, whereas China has recovered from it. So even the Chinese economy, which has bounced back, is not going to show a very rapid recovery. It will also show a recession. In fact, I think we are headed towards a deep depression, not just a recession. So if production can only recover gradually, the issue is that demand for non-essentials or discretionary items, that will remain low, because people have suffered a lot. Even in China, a large number of people are not going to malls and so on. That's what the reports coming are, that people are waiting, they are fearful, they've lost loved ones. And in those situations, the consumer sentiment does not change very quickly. Similarly, investment will not pick up, because everywhere there's lockdown and spare capacity. So capacity utilization will remain low. In India, RBI data had shown that in October, capacity utilization gone below 70%, and that would have dropped further. Today, the economy is not working at more than 25% capacity. So it is something in which the investment will not revive. If consumer sentiment is low and capacity utilization is low, then employment and incomes will also revive gradually. Employment will remain low, income generation will remain low, and only over a period of time, as the economy revives, only then will it be. So businesses that have exhausted the working capital, as I was saying earlier, or who failed during lockdown, which are not able to start, banks, which will be wary of lending to them, they will see to it that they give to those who are viable, but others who are less viable or who are showing signs of failure, banks may not lend to them, and therefore many businesses may not be able to start, and that will be a dampener to the recovery. And in fact, the bank's own financial conditions may deteriorate as a result of failures that are likely to take place during this period. So banks will be very wary, and banks will have to protect themselves. So I think all told, the sentiment will be rather low. Next slide, please. So the question is, what could be the likely rate of growth of the economy in 2021? Now, the economy at the present is not working at more than 25%. They're only the essentials, like some parts of agriculture, some part of transportation, government administration, medicines, hospitals. These are the things. And when you see empty roads and offices shut and so on, then you realize that large part of the economy is not functioning. And if the large part of the economy is not functioning, then quite clearly, from my estimate, the economy is working at less than 25%. in other words, 75% of the economy is not working. Now, I made some assumption that suppose the lockdown is for 2 months and then there's a recovery over a year to where we were in January 2020. Then I worked out that the GDP growth rate will be minus 35% this year. You know, starting with minus 75%, if you want to get to the 2% rate of growth in the last 4 months, then in the last 4 months, you'd have to have, a growth rate of something like 18%, which is almost impossible. So our economy will be down. Last year, we had a GDP of roughly about 200 lakh crores. And if it's down 35%, that means 70 lakh crore of production would be lost, and our GDP would come down to about 130 lakh crore. So this is where the problem is, that bulk of this loss of 70 lakh crore will be of the small businesses or workers or big businesses, etc. But the workers and the small businesses, they'll be the major losers. And that's why demand will not perk up, even if big business does a bit better. So what is required also is massive investment in health infrastructure and tackling the disease. So if we are to tackle all this, then we require to tighten the governance so that we can deliver to the workers, we can deliver to the small businesses and help them survive. If we don't do that, then we'll have a social chaos. So tightening governance and helping the workers and the small businesses, that has become crucial at this point of time, because they are going to lose incomes in large amount, and that will lead to fall in consumption, and that will create hunger and social problems. Next slide, please. Now, let us look at what the government can do. Where are the government's resources and what kind of deficit will it have? Now, taxes are collected from incomes and from production and consumption. So if the economy goes down to minus 35%, the tax collection will collapse much, much more. Why would that be the case? The reason is that GST is collected largely from those items which are either sin goods or in the high tax bracket, and those are the non-essentials. The essentials are taxed either at a low rate or zero rate. So bulk of the production now is of the essentials, which are not taxed, and the production of the non-essential items which pay higher taxes, that has gone down to zero, and that will recover very slowly, because those are the discretionary items, and those items production will revive only with a time lag. So the GST collection will be low. Similarly, when incomes fall, all businesses will find that for the first 4-5 months, they will be incurring heavy losses. So in the year, they'll have very little profit or no profit, or actually a loss. So in which case, corporation tax collection will also fall, income tax collection will also fall. And that's why last year, when we collected 16% of GDP as taxes, I'm arguing that that will come down to 8% of GDP. Now, 8% of not the 200 lakh crores, but the 130 lakh crore. So last year, when we collected 16% of 200 lakh crore, roughly 32 lakh crores, now we'll be down to about 10.4 lakh crore. That means tax shortfall will be about 22 lakh crores. Now, with only 10.4 lakh crore of tax collection and non-tax revenue also coming down in the same proportion, you'll find that it'll be very difficult for all governments, center and states, to meet their current expenditures. And then there are new expenditures that they have to meet. So the old expenditures will be very, very difficult to meet. And as you know, that the government expenditures have a committed part. So, for instance, you have the interest payment as a committed part. You have subsidies. You have defense expenditure, etc. So you will have to see that large amount of curtailment will have to take place so that we can fulfill this loss of 22 lakh crores of revenue that would take place in the year. And so several kinds of cuts would be required. Next slide, please. So with this kind of resource shortage, the only thing that the government can do is to have a survival package, and this survival package is what needs to be spelled out. So what we can do is, from the budget, we have to redraw the budget completely, because the revenue projections are all going to be wrong. The expenditure projections are all going to be different from what were planned in the month of January, when the budget was presented on 1st of February. So new projections are required to reduce expenditures. And what happens to the fiscal deficit? The fiscal deficit in the the budget was projected, in the central budget was projected at 3.8%, but you had the PSUs and other also having fiscal deficit. You had the states. So the total fiscal deficit of the economy is 10% of GDP. So that means of the 200 lakh crore, 20 lakh crore was the thing. Now 20 lakh crore of 130 lakh crore is 15.5%. So therefore, the fiscal deficit, without, if you don't cut back any expenditures, will be 15.5% of the GDP. Further, because you are going to be collecting a lot less revenue, about 20 lakh crores less, so therefore it will be another 17% of the reduced GDP that will be added on. And then you need to increase expenditures, to support the poor, the survival package, where you give support to the workers, you give support to small businesses, etc. And I'm assuming that half the population will not be able to get any income, and they would be given half the World Bank $1.9 per person per day. And if you calculate at 75 rupees, then you need another 15 lakh crores of rupees to be given to these people. Some part of it will come out of subsidies and the already committed expenditures under the different schemes, but still it will be about 14% of GDP that you require. And then in addition, you require increased medical expenditures on dealing with COVID-19, etc. So in other words, the fiscal deficit will be way, way above if we don't cut our expenditures. That's why at this point, whatever the resources of the government are, those have to go into giving a survival package to the workers and to the small businesses and so on. Now, at this point of time, if you give a stimulus to the big business and medium business, that will not work. This stimulus has to be given when they begin to start working. When they start working, then if you give a stimulus, it will have an effect. But when they're closed, the stimulus will not have an effect. So the survival package is needed, and then something for the big business and so on, which begins to fail. You'll have to have very innovative means of borrowing, etc., so that you can give a stimulus at a later stage. If you give the stimulus now, then the fiscal space later on will not be there to give further stimulus when the need actually arises. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we have machines, we have factories, and we have offices. Everything exists, but the economy has stalled. The poor and the unorganized sector producers who have little savings, they will need massive support, and we will need the extended public distribution system to be able to give them the essentials of life. And as I said earlier, we can use the public transport, buses and trucks and so on that are available. But if we open up too early, then the problem will be that there can be a spread and a second round, and that's why we may have to continue the lockdown, but with an expanded PDS system and so on. Then we have to set up the health infrastructure, which is very important. The health infrastructure that we have at the moment is inadequate. We need a lot more testing, and when we begin to have a lot more testing, then only can we open up, with certain degree of confidence. So in the meanwhile, what we need to do is we need to set up this health infrastructure where we may have to draft, hotels and hostels which are lying vacant at the moment. We may require more medical personnel. And I've been suggesting that we may have to draft students of second, third, fourth year of, the medical colleges and the nursing places and give them crash course, so that they can be brought into the picture, as and when the emergency arises. We also need to see how to produce more of the medical equipment like testing kits, like medicines and the ventilators and such like things. Those are also required to be produced. And for that, we must plan immediately, because this asymptomatic nature of the disease is posing a problem. We don't know who's spreading and who's not spreading. Only massive testing can help us. Because if things go out of control, as it happened in the US and UK, in the US, it was delayed, and now US has the largest number of cases and the largest number of deaths. UK also thought of herd immunity, and then when it got out of control, it then had to lock down completely. And in Europe, probably it will have the largest number of deaths. So we should not open up too quickly. We should see that our resource position of the government is such that it's consistent with the growth of the economy, because the growth will be down very badly, and the government's resource position will be stretched very badly. States have already been complaining because states are at the forefront of giving all the support. Now the states are complaining that they don't have resources, they're not getting from the center, and they can't get because even the center's resources are badly stretched, And giving a tax concession at this stage will be even more deadly, So our fiscal deficit, which is already probably running at roughly about 25 to 30% of GDP, that will go up further if we begin to give tax cuts, etc. Then there'll be no funds left even to give a survival package that is very essential to continue society. So government's resource position is very, very critical at this point of time, and survival is the only thing that we can look at the moment, so that when the disease is under control, then we can revive the economy quickly. So the problem being confronted today is a result of uneven development, and later on, once the disease is under control, then we can have a basic rethink about the development paradigm, the way people live. And Mr. Ratan Tata has already talked about the nature of our slums, where people are facing problems, where we are not able to implement lockdown. We can see in Dharavi, for instance, one after the other, things are going out of hand. Similarly, in other areas, in slums, where the crowded areas, where there may be 5 or 10 people to a room, where the rooms one after the other, there are, the chawls, etc., where it's very difficult to do physical isolation. There, the conditions are rather poor. So we need to think about the development paradigm. So as Mr. Vijay Kumar was earlier saying, once the pandemic is over, we will begin to reconsider the nature of trade, the nature of openness of our economy, how much we get from abroad and how much we make in India, the nature of travel industry, the environmental impact of our production, and so many other things. They'll have to be reconsidered. So I think we are heading towards a very different society and a very different economy. And that's the one big lesson. If we are able to win over this pandemic quickly, then I think things are going to change very dramatically. We have to begin to think about doing business in a very different way. We have to think about living in a very different way. And I'll end with, one of my neighbors, on the third day of the lockdown, he said, Arun, I did not realize with how little consumption we can do. We don't need to go to malls. We don't need to buy things unnecessarily. So in other words, this is something that, many people will cross their minds, and many people will be very depressed because their near ones, their friends, others who have passed away or have been affected by it. So everybody is being affected by it, and, there'll be a change in thinking of large number of people. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I'd love to answer them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's in your own style, inimitable style. You brought out so beautifully in the last 45 minutes what's happening, the pandemic, COVID, the impact on economy, Indian. So, all gentlemen, I request all the viewers to please put your question on the chat box so that the professor will be able to attend to your concern, answer your questions. In the meanwhile, I also got a couple of questions from others. Let me read out the professor. So, meanwhile, I'll request the gentlemen a big round of applause, Professor, for beautifully putting it across so many issues in next 30-35 minutes, and that requires a big round of applause from each one of us. So before I ask people to share their questions, please share your question. Those who are in the chat box, those who are online, the webinar and Facebook, type your questions. So my team will pick up the questions and pass it on to me. One of the questions what we received from one of the webinar partner is, my question to Professor Arun Kumar is, Indian economy is going through a tough place as the world economy is fearing a great depression since 1921. So how, according to you, Indian economy can survive in this global crisis and minimize the impact and minimize the effect on Great Depression?
So as I was saying, today the resource position of the Indian economy is very poor. Government doesn't have much resource. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Sir.
So the situation is rather grim. There's no production going on, or very little. Only the essentials are being produced. That's why I was saying that the Indian economy is down by 75% as compared to, say, January 2020. And even if the lockdown is partially removed, say next month, then still we'll be down by roughly about 60%, and only gradually will it recover within 1 year to where it was in January 2020. And that's why we'd be losing about 70 lakh crore worth of output. Now, with that kind of a situation, government will have to make the effort to see that people survive, because large amount of incomes of the unorganized sector, is trying to point out, which are 94% of the employment. And even in agriculture, unless we intervene carefully and see that their prices don't collapse, even agriculture will face a big problem. At the moment, there are reports of, vegetables and fruits rotting in the fields. People are not able to farm. And yesterday, BBC was showing pictures in other countries also, where they're just plowing the fruits and vegetables into the field. So this is a big problem that, in agriculture, the produce must come out. That is the most essential thing that people need. water, food, these are the two most essential things. They have to come into urban areas, and therefore the government must see to it that these are procured widely and distributed to urban areas where people need it. If we don't do this, then we cannot implement a lockdown. Then we can also not feed people, and there'll be a social breakdown. And lockdown is very essential if we don't want the disease to spread. So at this point, we have to have a holding strategy for the coming 1 year. We'd be very lucky if heat reduces the intensity of the virus, if a medicine is discovered in the next 4 5 months, if a vaccine is discovered in the next 4 5 months, we'll be very lucky. Till then, we have to do a holding operation. Once a medicine is available, once the vaccine is available for the virus, then perhaps we can open out more liberally. But till then, we have to go very slowly. The lesson from the Spanish flu in 1918 to 1920 was that the second round killed more people, because as more and more people got infected, suppose the death rate of the infected people is say 1%. Now, if only 1 lakh people get it, then you have only 1,000 people dying. But if 10 million get it, then you will have 1 lakh people dying. So, for instance, unless we have proper testing, unless we have proper medicine, etc., we have to go slow. Otherwise, there will be a social breakdown. So I think at this point, we have to have a holding operation, and begin to think that once we are able to hold it, then how to expand the economy through government intervention by giving stimulus. That is, I think, 2 stages we have to go through.
There's another question, Professor. Since our service-driven and consumption-driven economy, do you think that reduced manufacturing activity would not have a major impact like other economies of the world?
No, I think we have an integration. There are services of two kinds: productive services and consumptive services. Consumptive services will see a decline. Productive services, which are like trade and transport and finance, etc., they are linked to production. If your manufacturing and your production is down, then they will also be down. So therefore, we have to see an integrated pattern. In this integrated pattern, we have to see how manufacturing and services both survive. If manufacturing goes down, if agriculture goes down, then you will find that even the services will go down very substantially. So an integrated package is needed. At this point, everybody is affected. As you know, trade is not taking place, transport is not taking place, malls are not opening up, restaurants are not opening up, and so on. So consumptive services are down, and productive services are also down. Productive services need to open up first, and then we can think about the consumptive services.
There is also a question from Rajkumar Murugeshan. Thanks for the knowledge dissemination. I have a question. TAFE is giving tractor on free rental basis now, and is from TAFE, of course, to help the farmers. Why not more corporates step in and help farmers? This will also help public availability of food items, and which is very, very essential.
So that's a very good idea. I think corporates have to do that. Especially the manufacturers of machinery. Whether it be tractors, harvester combines, threshers, they should agree to loan these things out at very cheap rates. And if that can be done, definitely. But I think the problem is how to move farm supplies from the farm to the urban areas. Especially the perishable goods. You can store wheat, etc. Government stocks are already very high. They have an excess stock of about 50 million tons. Those have to be moved very quickly to urban areas and supplied to people wherever they are. So these are all part of a package that will have to be worked out by the government. So it's a good suggestion that the manufacturers and the business community, they should pitch in into this.
There's also a question which I don't think we're not an astrologer nor ICMR. He says, you were saying about the second attack. Is it true? If so, when do you think it will show its head? I wish we'd have known that. I think we got solution for everything. Your views on this, Professor?
No, I think, globally, everybody is worried about a second, phase of the attack, because as the disease spreads to a larger segment of the population, and people say it will happen. It happened in all the cases that a larger segment of the population gets attacked in the second round. And that's why in the Spanish flu, yesterday, the WHO was saying that 100 million people died, of which the vast majority died in the second round. Because when it spread to the general population in the second round in 2019, then people died. Now, something similar could happen now. For instance, we have managed to keep the population confined under lockdown, so it hasn't spread so much, and only a few million people have been affected. But if it spreads to, say, 100 million or 500 million or 60% of the world population of say 8 billion, then you can see 5 billion people. And if 5 billion, even if say 1% die, that's a huge number. So I think, we need to worry that we need to get a medicine, we need to get a vaccine as quickly as possible. And there are hundreds of labs globally which are trying to find out a vaccine. But there are a large number of labs which are looking at, how to get the medicine, and artificial intelligence is being used. The use of AI is taking place to try and discover that out of the drugs that we have, which one will work best on this virus. So all these attempts are going on. This is very good. We are using technology to good use, but technology also created the problem, because technology enabled the disease to spread very rapidly from one continent to the other. What Gandhi said in his Hind Swaraj, he was criticizing the railways because railways enables the disease to spread very fast within a country. But now with vast amount of air travel, you can have the disease spread across continents within hours. And therefore to get to know about it, like that's what happened in Italy and Iran. It came from China, but they were not even aware of it. And then it spread like wildfire over there. So, technology has to be used, get a vaccine, get a medicine, so that the second round is not as lethal as it was in the Spanish flu. That's very important.
There's a question from Mr. Mohan. He
Yes.
says, what is that we as a citizen of this country do at this point in time for the country? At the same time, how can we as an individual take care of our future? So as a citizen, there's a constitutional responsibility put on you. How can you cooperate and do something which will enable the country to recover from this? It's a collective work. So what is your advice on this?
So, at this point, a lockdown is very crucial. So everybody must follow the lockdown procedures that are being implemented. That is the best way to protect the health workers. That's the best way to protect the frontline workers like police, etc. Police has to be very, very humane. It must recognize that people who are running away back to their villages, they are going out of desperation. They're going out of emotional need. Second thing that I think people can do is not hoard. The middle class and the upper classes, they're hoarding, they're buying up and the shelves are emptying out. The FMCG sector is facing supply bottlenecks because inputs are not moving in as quickly because trade and transport has gone down quite considerably. So if they don't hoard the supplies and, they don't create shortages, that would be a great help for the society and for the economy. And thirdly, whatever work can be done, I think a lot of middle class and upper middle class people have access to internet. They can begin to help society in a variety of ways, like teachers are teaching students. Others can also do that. Medical personnel is busy with the hospitals, etc. But chartered accountants and others can also help out. Lawyers can help out, in a variety of ways, to run courses, run classes from the homes, through the internet. And I think a lot of that is happening. People in the field of arts and music, they can cheer up the population by giving music, etc. So a lot of things can be done. So what we have to realize is that we are a society, which means cooperation amongst people. We had become very individualistic and self-centered. We have to get out of that and we have to cooperate. And that cooperation, if that spirit comes now, that will help us in the future also, because as we cooperate, our society becomes better. So I think some of these things can be done effectively at this point of time while we are locked down at home.
There's another question. What are the positive, favorable conditions peculiar to Indian economy? Because everything has got two sides of the coin. So what is that you think it will be favorable to the situation for India to blossom and continue to do well under these circumstances?
So, our advantage is we are a young population, and hopefully young people are being less affected by it, and hopefully they are surviving more. So that would be our advantage at this point of time. We are also agriculture dependent economy still. Our output from the agriculture is still 15% as far as the US and other economies are concerned. It's hardly 1, 2 or 3%. So they will suffer a big decline because for them agriculture is a small component. Bulk of it is services and manufacturing, which is not able to come online. Whereas in our economy, agriculture will give us support, and agriculture, if it, our climate is favorable to doing well in agriculture. So I think agriculture and the young population, these will be our two big advantages going forward. Our advantage also will be artificial intelligence and the software and technology. We have to use that effectively, to solve the problems that will come up. So I think these three things I see as advantages. Fourth is that if we realize that we have to have better governance. Our governance has been very poor. delivery has been very poor. And if this chastens us and we begin to do better governance, that can be a big lesson. But I think that would be something that everybody in the world would be looking at, how to improve governance and how to improve delivery. So that would be another thing.
There's another question, Professor. Kindly explain as to what exactly you mean requiring tightening the governance.
Okay. So, India has massive corruption, and that's why, like in PDS, like in procurement, like in distribution of the gas through the Ujjwala scheme, a lot of reports have come of a lot of corruption. So poor people don't get, the food and the gas, etc., that they're supposed to get. Our medical systems are very decrepit, our medical procedures. So our public hospitals suffer a great deal as a result of poor governance. And these are the critical things that we need. We need food, essential supplies to everybody. We need medical much better than what it is today. We need, the discovery of medicines, etc. Our education system has to be much better than what it is. So when I say better governance, it means better delivery to the public, And for that, our local bodies are very important. Our state governments are very important. They are the ones who deliver to the people. So when corruption levels go down and when, people begin to do what they're supposed to do, then that will help in delivery of all this. So at much lower resource cost, we'll be able to deliver to our population. And that's what I mean by better governance.
There's also a question from Mr. Karthik Khan. He wants to know, do you think the bad economic indicators will lead to more opaque how the government runs the economy? Or do you think this will lead to a more transparent approach in running the economy as was not in the case of demonetization?
So, this is a very tricky thing, what will happen in the future. But I think South Korean example is before us, that when the government was transparent, then people believed the government and they did not have so many deaths. But in India, what the situation is that there's lack of transparency. There's a lot of confusion. One state government is doing one thing, another state government is doing another thing. The center is saying something, the state government is doing something else. And that then creates a huge problem. Because if there's no coordination, then you have a problem. So this is the time for fiscal, cooperative federalism, where all state governments and the center act together. And for that, what we require is that we have a committee of chief ministers under the prime minister, and we have a committee under the chief secretary of all the of the cabinet secretary and the chief secretaries of the states and the DGPs of states, so that they can coordinate. Otherwise, like what happened in Delhi, when it was announced by the UP government that we are going to send buses to the border, large number of people started rushing, and there was a huge problem. So we need to have better coordination of all the policies in the country. And that's what I think, if cooperative federalism comes, then we'll have much better coordinated policies and much more effective policies in the country. If there's a lack of cooperation among the states and amongst the various elements of the government, then there'll be a problem. So we also need to go towards greater decentralization. Decentralization means trying to take care of the problems of each individual area as per their requirement. We can't have everything centralized. So these are some of the gains that may take place as far as administration, as far as government is concerned, and as far as better governance is concerned.
There's another question from one of the YouTube viewers. Economic stimulus to industries, especially MSME, should be direct by the government instead of going through the banking system, which is very conservative. What's your opinion on this? Ignore this question if it has been addressed, as I could not connect only now. Yeah, I think this is a late question, but I think this is a very valid question. You mentioned security with the bank and how they are going to, how do you change the mindset of the banks in terms of the NPA, RBI looking at the bank, how they look at MPAs, the definition of NPAs, maybe some input from you.
No, so I think, the question is correct. I think MSMEs have to get directly from the government. Banking system will have its own limitations. They are already going to be under stress. There'll be a lot of failures that will take place of businesses, which will affect their balance sheets. So I think the government will have to approach directly, and give to them. It's like saying, when the business houses are told that you have to pay wages, when they are actually not selling anything, then they're eating into the reserves or incurring losses. Similarly, banks then say that we're not going to take interest, but we're going to pay interest to the people who have deposited with us, then they are also going to run into problem. So I think this has to come as direct subsidy from the government to the MSME sector. And I think there are various loan schemes to the small scale sector and the medium scale sector and the cottage sector that the government already has. So those schemes will have to be made more effective, and the availability of credit to these people will have to come directly from the government. And I think we can use the Jandan accounts and we can use the other accounts to put money, like what's happening in the USA, where the US government is putting money directly into the taxpayers' accounts, so that everybody gets a certain minimum amount. And even in the US, though they are putting $1,000, it is said that it is inadequate. So a certain adequate amount has to be put, and that's why I had argued in my talk that roughly about 15 lakh crores would be required as support, as a survival package for the poor people and the small businesses, for the MSME sector and so on. And on top of that, then we can think of what can be given to the other businesses which do not fall in the category of the micro and the small units.
Since we have a couple of more minutes, we'll take a few more questions.
Yes.
The other question is, travel and hospitality are the two industries which have been affected badly, particularly in April, June, when normalcy of these sectors do well. Normally, the sector do well. How much is this going to impact the overall economy?
This will have a huge impact. As you know, several airlines which were already in trouble, they may collapse. Large number of hotels are lying idle and vacant, and there's no chance that they'll recover very soon. So hotel industry and similarly tourism, because people will not travel, and the fares will go up, because if the airlines have to keep one seat in between vacant, they can only have 2/3 of the plane. If the buses and the trains also have to have half the capacity, then all fares will go up, and that will affect travel very badly. So fares will go up, the hotel charges and so on will also go up as a result of the fact that they'll have to keep occupancy down. Restaurants will not be able to function as per capacity. They'll also have to cut down to half so as to have social distancing. So I think there'll be a lot of failures in the transport sector, in the travel sector, in the hospitality sector. And the government will have to see how to help them, what can be done, what kind of subsidies can be given. But let me say the scope for that is very little, because already if you're giving 15 lakh crore at the bottom level to the small businesses and to the poor, then how much you can give. So I think this is where very innovative means have to be found. The wealthy in the country would have to lend to the government, large amount of funds, because from their past saving, whatever funds they have, they would have to lend that. So government, cannot raise taxes, because if it raises taxes, then there'll be a further disincentive to everything. So instead, I think people have to lend to the government, and people have to come forward to lend, those who have the capacity to lend. That'll be only the top 5% of the population who can lend. So I think, very innovative ways of raising funds. I think RBI, people say you can borrow from RBI, but that doesn't mean that there are resources. RBI's reserves are held in the form of dollar or in the form of gold. You'll have to liquidate that and bring resources, which mean you'll have to import things. But globally, the situation will be very bad, because every country will be going into depression. So not many countries will be willing to support and help other countries. So the rich countries, the G20 countries, will have to act in concert to see how all these industries, like airlines will fail in a big way. The airlines industry is saying that we are failing, we are going to fail in a big way. Hotel industry, which is also global chains, they are also going to fail in a big way. So how to support that? That is a big issue. And for that, bonds may be issued, so that in the future you can pay for that. So some kind of bond schemes, etc., would be required, where the wealthy would be able to then lend to the government.
There's a question from Mr. Umanath Singh. How do you rate the measures of the present government, and what is one single advice you think the government should be focusing?
So, what has been done is inadequate. I'm very happy that the government put the economy to lockdown. It should have been done a little earlier. The government stopped people from coming from abroad, from the areas. That was a very good step. So there have been some good steps, but there's been not so good steps. The 1.7 lakh crore package for the poor is a very inadequate package. As I said, we need something like 15 lakh crores if we are to save the poor and the small businesses. So we have to jack that up much more, And what I'd advise the government is, at this point, only think of a survival package till the lockdown is there, Only when the economy begins to revive, only then begin to give stimulus to the businesses. Because when the businesses are closed, the stimulus will not work. and the fiscal space will go away. So keep the fiscal space ready so that when the economy begins to revive, at that time you give the stimulus to the economy. At this point, think of only a survival package.
There's also a question, think with the crude price is the lowest ebb in the history, how will the Indian economy survive this crisis, and what, according to you, should be the economic strategy, the way forward for India when the price of crude, where our import bill is very high in respect of crude, how can you control and how can you balance it out to the surplus earned by crude import vis-a-vis the expenditures?
So, in a recession or in a depression, all commodity prices fall. So whether it be, petroleum goods or it be other commodities, everything will fall. And therefore, there's a danger of a deflation taking place in the economy. In fact, as I was saying, even food prices may crash because, demand for food will go down as the unorganized sector doesn't have the purchasing capacity. So globally, I think all prices will go down, but that will not mean the demand will rise because the incomes are falling, production is falling. So therefore, saying that, crude prices will fall, at the moment, there's a sort of peculiar situation because there's oversupply of crude because of the fight between Saudi Arabia and Russia. That has been sorted out, but still the excess supply is there. They'll cut back production because without that, there's no storage capacity. So, in other words, the crude will help the Indian economy by lowering prices. But I think if a deflation comes because all commodity prices go down, then investment will further fall, expenditures will further fall, and therefore the economy will go further down. So at this point, what we need is how to, when the economy comes out of lockdown, how to generate demand. That becomes the crucial thing because if the demand is there, only then will all these prices begin to stabilize. If these prices don't stabilize, they keep falling and deflation takes place, then we are in a very dangerous situation.
There's a question from Umar Rani.
Yeah.
Post-lockdown, retail automation will get boost, it seems. If so, what would be about the consumption and demand of electronic products, whether would be an upward or trend or downward trend?
See, there will be a trend towards e-commerce and therefore greater use of internet, greater use of electronic means, etc. So that demand will certainly be there. But there's a large number of people who are in the trade sector. As Kate, the Confederation of All India Traders says, there are 6 crore small traders and big traders. And if they employ even 2 people each, we are talking about 18 crore people, in the sector. We have to worry about what happens to their employment, what happens to their demand, because if that sector crashes because of this rapid rise of e-commerce, then I think we can be in trouble. So I think we have to see how to balance this out, how to create alternate employment before this happens. But yes, it is a possibility that given the lockdown, e-commerce will do well. The mom and pop shop, the hard shops, they may not be the ones that will survive. Many of them may go down because they're closed down. So I think we have to balance it out. The government will have to see how to protect that sector. I think this FDI thing and this e-commerce that the government has done a flip flop. First it said that e-commerce will be allowed for doing all kinds of product sale. That has now been only restricted to essential. I think that's coming as a pressure from Kate and from the trade community. So I think we have to balance between all this so that employment doesn't fall. As it is, employment has fallen. If it falls further, we'll be in deeper trouble. So the government will have to balance the policy very carefully.
There's another question from Karthik Kant, which is little interesting. Do you think the government will be able to service the securities of Kisan Vikas Patra and interest on post office account? I think our government is financially sound enough to take care of this. Anyway, Professor, your view on this?
So, at this point, as I said, the government lacks the resources. If the tax revenue and the non-tax revenue fall by some like 50%, as I was saying, then the government will have problem in terms of servicing interest payment also. Because it'll first have to do the survival package, The survival package itself would absorb 15 lakh crore. So it'll have to borrow extensively from the RBI, monetize the deficit very substantially, and through that, then it can pay back, on whatever the interest payment would be required. Because if it begins to default on interest payment, then I think our financial system will begin to collapse. So that's one of the things that the government will have to be very careful about to see that the financial system doesn't collapse. And therefore, at this point, the fiscal deficit will not matter. If your fiscal deficit even rises dramatically, because demand is down. So if you can raise the demand through fiscal deficit, so we should not worry about the fiscal deficit at this point, but try and see that the financial sector survives, businesses survive, and people survive. That's why I call it a survival package.
One last question, Professor, before we let you go.
Sure.
Is there any case for scam in India related to COVID-19 activities? In Nepal, it appears the procurement and involvement of health minister has been suspected, but I think wherever there's an opportunity, scam do happen. So what should be the the government view and the public view to make this scam-free COVID initiatives actually?
So, in India, a disaster is called the fourth crop. You have the Rabi crop, the Kharif crop, and you have, an in-between spring crop. And then it's called always that when there's a flood, when there's a drought, then a lot of money is made. Now, those are different times. This is a very different time. At this point of time, this is unprecedented. If scams continue at this rate, then the effectiveness of government goes down. That's why I was saying governance has to be improved. And for that, public pressure is very important. I think if the public becomes aware, then the scams don't take place. So like in Nepal, you found that you've discovered something. In India also, if the public is aware, and that's where I think the middle class and the upper middle class who can afford to, be the watchdogs, if they become active, then the scams will not take place. So I hope the scams don't take place. I hope the government becomes effective. I hope the essentials reach the common people. I hope the economy survives, the society survives. If scams take place in any big way, I think society will not survive the kind of crisis we have.
There's also a question. Sorry, one more question.
Yeah.
I thought I don't want to disappoint Mr. Balasubramaniam. Yes, the Indian dollar price today is around 76 odd rupees plus. Now, is there any chance of this improvement? What is the situation dollar with rupees?
See, whenever the world economy goes into a crisis, the dollar appreciates and all other currencies depreciate because dollar is like the reserve currency, Dollar is like holding gold. So you see during 2007-8 global financial crisis, even though the crisis began with the subprime crisis in the USA and the US was the source of the crisis, even then dollar appreciated, other currencies depreciated, So when there's uncertainty, people want to go into certainty and then go into the dollar. So therefore, the rupee will depreciate and the dollar will rise. Other currencies, if the Chinese currency was also strong, people may have also gone into the Chinese currency. But at this point of time, there's a huge uncertainty about what the response of China will be, how people will deal with China. So I think, that will not happen, but people will go into the dollar and other currencies and including the rupee will depreciate till the crisis is resolved.
Thank you, Professor. It has been a fascinating evening. You have been so kind enough to take all the questions. As a typical master economist, you have been able to analyze and elicit, clearly bring out on each of the questions, and your presentation has been outstanding. May I request all the participants who are watching the program live and also on chat, please give your views. Awesome. Type it out so that we convey my best appreciation to the professor. And let's hope, Professor, usually you have been very, very critical. This time you have been very, very neutral. I hope with the outcome today, we are all optimistic. We'll recover, we'll do well. And thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. We'll get you back again after a few months, maybe a few weeks, so that we'll keep reviewing the economies, because you are thought as a master economist will do a lot of good to the people who are not only in the industry and individuals and management professionals. I think your insight and your quality of thought process has been outstanding. Thank you, Professor, for sharing valuable time. I know how busy you are, giving so many webinars and writing so many articles in this difficult situation. Thank you once again so much. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you, viewers who are watching the program live on different sources of ours, live on YouTube, live on Facebook, live webinar, and also through the Zoom. And please log in, and we have lined up some lovely events for you. We also log in for the quiz, which is bringing it to every morning between 8 and 10 window. Also go and practice some yogas, attend our morning workshops, morning talks, and afternoon talks. And afternoon, we also send some lovely, excellent articles for you to read. Also take part in the business puzzle. It will refresh your mind.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor, and bye-bye and good night till we meet again. Viewers, you have been a great viewers. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks a lot. This
Thank
was
you, sir.
very
It was a
nice.
lovely evening. It went off very well, and most important, when we do everything, we also wanted to go flawless in terms of our technology. I think it has worked out very well, and we get a lot of questions, and we have got a time limit of 6 to 7:15 MMA known for time management, so that people can plan their time management very well. But in spite of that, you really took so many questions. Thank you so much, and I'll keep in touch with you.
Yes, thank you very much. Would you have a recording of this also?
Yes, yes. It will be. I will send you a detailed mail